Hello and welcome to ALTbrown, a podcast highlighting alternative voices in communities of color. You can find us at altbrown.tumblr.com or on soundcloud.com/altbrown. Joining us today is Hassan Umer from Pakistan. He's the vocalist for the bands Multinational Corporations and Foreskin. He also hosts an extreme music blog, Eternal Abhorrence.wordpress.com. Here's a clip from the song Advertisement Overdose by Multinational Corporations on the album Jamaat al-Maut.
Advertisement overdose, watching TV, comatose, surfing sound, electricity, till the up, not for me.
What do you think is the state of the alternative music scene in the subcontinent right now?
I think it's doing really well in India, to be honest. It's far better than what's going on in Pakistan, because in India, every major city has become a music outlet in its own. Like the other day, Carcass, like they're a big UK metal band. They came over to India. Napalm Death is coming this year for Bangalore Open Air again, and like we keep getting these news from India, like, year in year out, that so and so band they're coming over there to play, and the local bands in India too. They're fantastic now. I mean, growing up as a kid in Pakistan, I never expected that a place known for Bollywood would have been like putting out such great music like they're doing these days. And it's good for them, you know. And Bangladesh is doing really well too. Bangladesh have this whole black metal, death metal scene going on, which is really distinct from the rest of the subcontinent. And Nepal's always been great, and Sri Lanka is also picking up. It's just Pakistan which is lagging behind, and that's just because it's so hard to put on a gig here. And it's hard because there are no venues at all. We have to make do with what we have, and that's just backyard gigs and swimming pool gigs and shit like that.
Yeah, and what difference do you see between the music scenes in all these countries? Like, do these countries have like a certain niche that they can fill well?
Yeah, I do believe that, because I keep talking to different bands from these countries through my music zine, right? And I always notice distinct attitudes throughout. And some of these attitudes cross over, because, for example, in the Bengal region, this divide between India and Bangladesh, there's like a distinct attitude towards old school death metal and black metal there, which you don't find the rest of the subcontinent. And Nepal has this really big grindcore orientation, and it comes through in most of their stuff. Sri Lanka and India, and they have their own thing going on in different regions as well. So it's really interesting what's going on in the subcontinent musically. Pakistan, of course, is best known for its doom metal stuff.
Yeah, my understanding is that in the West, a lot of these extreme genres of music kind of fell by the wayside. They're not as popular as they once were. What factors do you think contribute to their growth in the subcontinent and elsewhere in the world?
I think it's taken a lot of time for that stuff to filter over here. I mean, of course, there have been like extreme metal bands in our region as early as the early 90s. We had Dusk in Pakistan doing Death Doom, and Dying Embrace in India doing the same type of stuff. But the whole internet factor over the last couple of years, like it's far easier for kids these days to get into stuff like Brutal Truth or Asuk and bands like that than it was for us to get into that stuff 15 years ago. The internet has really allowed us to get into this type of music. And of course, there's the fact that to a lot of kids, you know, we can't easily settle for that romantic pop shit that we hear on the radio every day, and we need to listen to something extremely angry, extremely aggressive, or extremely like heavy just to get through our days. And that's why genres like doom metal in Pakistan and death metal in Bangladesh, etc., you know, they're getting more popular amongst a certain niche audience, and that's really cool.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is among this is that a lot of, you know, upper class South Asians, they may pick up the guitar or an instrument for maybe a month or a year or so, and they'll quit. What keeps you and these bands motivated across time?
Maybe because like most of us are from that upper class background, but I've noticed that too. And frankly, to be honest, I've seen that same attitude with some like lower middle class ones too. It's just about the passion. Like, people will want to pick up a guitar just because they want to learn a couple chords from the local pop song favorite, which is Atif Aslam or whatever. And after they've impressed like a certain number of girls or guys, if they're inclined that way, they're gonna like head off. You know, But in the genres we work with, like extreme metal and stuff like that, it's more like it's more than just like a hobby, because we want to create something, and that just drives that urge further. People just become a bit more dedicated to their instrument if they're actively listening to or participating in the extreme metal culture.
One thing I noticed is that in the West, a lot of these extreme music genres end up diverging into their own scenes, all their own niches. Have you seen that happening in Pakistan or in South Asia? And if not, what keeps it kind of them glued together?
I think there's not much divergence going on. The only major divergence we had was 2 or 3, 4 years ago, when the old school minded bands were like the old school death metal influenced bands, black metal influenced, like doom metal influenced band. They just like made it clear that we're separate from the metalcore scene, like from the groove metal scene or whatever. That true metal versus poser metal mentality. And frankly, it's that divergence between the two has actually helped both sets out a lot here, because like instead of going to a gig with a hackneyed lineup, you can actually like choose now if you want to see XYZ or ABC. You can actually people know there's a difference between these two kinds of stuff now. That's actually good.
Now you're basically embedded in the extreme music scene. How do you feel that popular music has changed in Pakistan and across South Asia?
I think it's changed tenfold. It's gotten worse. That's the first thing I can think of. It certainly hasn't gotten any better.
How would you say it's gotten worse?
I think it's first reason is probably because we're older now and we can like actually understand this stuff as shit. But even when we like compare it to some of the older pop classics, some of that stuff, like most of that stuff in Pakistan at least, had really good songwriting, and it was just it was just good catchy music. Whereas nowadays it's hardly even catchy. Like we don't even understand why people are even listening to half the stuff on the radio, on the TV, whatever. And it's just like trashy, shitty music for like trashy, shitty on minds. There's nothing to it anymore.
Now, last year, your EP, Jamaat al-Maut, got a lot of accolades across the metal scene. You even ended up on some top 10 lists for 2014. How do you feel about that?
And we were pretty excited because of the whole response. We made that shit like for ourselves in a shitty old bedroom turned into a studio. And not even like a proper studio. We just had like okay equipment, and we recorded that stuff in 3 days. And to see it get so much like coverage from extreme metal people and whatnot, like that's a huge motivation for us to keep doing what we do.
All right. And what challenge do you see the extreme music scene face in the subcontinent?
The biggest challenge will obviously just be this: not enough labels putting stuff out, not enough venues hosting our gigs. Once we get these two hurdles cleared, we can see like a major improvement in every aspect of our scene.
All right. And do you see like specific challenges in different countries, or is it roughly the same?
Roughly the same. Just worse in Pakistan than compared to, say, India or Nepal.
All right, and
we'll take it from there.
Now, along with your music, you also have a blog, Eternal Abhorrence. What sort of coverage do you want to highlight out of that?
I basically started the blog to just review and interview my favorite punk and metal bands, and I have done that. I've been able to interview bands like Integrity and Doom, who are big in the hardcore and crust scene, and I've also managed to put out a couple local compilations of crust, punk, and grindcore music. And that's when the whole, you can say the aim of the blog shifted from just focusing on the international scene to having a bit more focus on the Desi scene, because there's a lot of untapped potential, a lot of bands that one can write about, and I've actually been able to be the official partner or whatever for a couple gigs in Bangladesh and India too. So it's pretty cool, how the blog, it's been little over a year. Eternal Abhorrence has been running, and I'm actually pretty pleased with how it's turned out. I didn't really expect it that I'd be like interviewing so many bands or highlighting so many local bands towards an international punk and metal scene, wherever. It's pretty cool what's been going on.
All right, so at the moment, what bands would you like to name check? Like, what bands would you like to highlight from the subcontinent?
The subcontinent, Dionysus, they're from Pakistan. They play doom metal mixed with black and death metal. Iritum, they're a band of a Dionysus member who also plays in Multinational Corporations. They're putting out an album this year, and they play old school funeral doom. Eternal Armageddon from Bangladesh. They just put out a demo this year called Black Thrash Bastards. They play old school black metal along the lines of Bathory. And from Nepal, Juga. They're one of the best hardcore bands in the world, in my opinion, because they're really rooted in the whole holy terror style of ringworm and integrity. Also, Genocide Shrines from Sri Lanka. They play war metal, and they're like one of the best war metal bands in the world right now. It's crazy that they're from Sri Lanka.
That's really fascinating. I was wondering how a lot of these extreme metal bands incorporate their own indigenous culture in the scene. Do you see that happening, and how?
It is happening, and it does happen. I mean, the last band I named, Genocide Shrines, they do that whole war metal style of Beherit and Blasphemy, Archcourt, and whatnot. But the cool thing is that not even not just musically, but also aesthetically, in terms of the visual aesthetics of the artwork and their live presence, they're very rooted in the whole Hindu tantric culture of Sri Lanka. If you listen to their music, they're talking about like the dark side of Hindu mythology, and they have their whole thing coming across in their artwork and live performances too, which is really cool. Like, instead of talking about demons and devils from Western Christian perspective, like, they're talking about it from something they're familiar with, they're rooted with. There are a lot of other bands doing like this sort of indigenous stuff in the subcontinent. Nepal has a couple of these bands. Dying Out Flame is a band that came out last year and gotten a couple of major metal webzines too, I think, Metal Underground and whatnot. They do what you call Vedic death metal. Like, they play blistering fast death metal and they interlace it with Vedic influences to highlight the mythological aspect.
That's fascinating. I was wondering, I remember you mentioned Dusk. Now, a member of that band, Hassan Umer, ended up kind of exploding in popularity with his own solo career and with the band Mizrab. How do you feel about that success?
More power to him. Foreskin played a gig last year, and Faraz Anwar headlined it too. So it shows that Faraz hasn't forgotten his roots. I mean, he's blown up. He's become a pop star. He makes acoustic songs and plays them on television unplugged. I mean, that's pretty pop as far as I'm concerned, but he hasn't forgotten his roots. He's really grateful for the hardcore fans of his music who still listen to every note of his most technical guitar solos. And to my experience, he's always been like a down-to-earth, humble guy.
All right. One observation I have is that, again, I'm kind of going back to the decline of extreme music, or the kind of loss of popularity of extreme music in the Western world compared to the scenes that are emerging in South Asia. And I'm thinking it probably has something to do with kind of the relative increasing prosperity in the Western world, and kind of the conditions in South Asia and across the world. That
can be true, because me and my friend Suleiman were discussing the other day. He plays in this band Barzakh. Barzakh have been going on since the 90s, and they play experimental metal. So me and him were talking about the other day about how that people in Pakistan can open the lyric sheet to a Cro-Mags album or a Discharge album and be like, they're talking about our life here. We can relate to what Cro-Mags shout in a random song like Survival in the Streets, or Street Justice, or like Discharge, War is no fairy tale or whatever. But when we talk about how people in the West may perceive it now, we just laugh, because we think that maybe they've prospered a little bit too much for that. But at the same time, the people who introduced this stuff in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, whatnot, where we are to an extent privileged and relatively better off than most of the most of the country, because we have, first of all, we have internet access, and that enables us to get all this information, makes us aspire to start the scenes here, which I don't think should be a big problem, because that's that's how a scene starts at the end of the day. It was only a matter of time until South Asia caught on to this stuff, because if you just look further east, in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, those guys have the biggest DIY extreme music scenes in the world. And if you look at the history of how they started, they went through far worse times than like the subcontinent countries, both musically, artistically, and like in terms of a general lifestyle. So it was just a matter of time till it got started in Pakistan, India, वगैरह.
All right. And you mentioned there's kind of a class divide between the music scene and the lower class, even though there's some commonality. What sort of challenges do you see there?
The general, like the occupation of a musician in Pakistan has in the old days been associated with like more lower class people, and over time with how rock music etc. came out here, it started being like proliferated among the more rich people who were into Western styles. So, and that filtered down to the lower class as well when Junoon and bands like that started. So like in between, there's middle class people like me who are just like, you know what, screw this classified, we're just going to try and do stuff. Like there are people in my band who are extremely like teeter-tottering over the brink of poverty, but there's like fairly well-off people too. So we just try to ignore the whole class thing. What matters is like where your heart's at. That's what matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, talking about this, I'm reminded about the Takwa Core documentary featuring the Kominas and Michael Muhammad. I remember there was one scene there where they were trying to advertise for the show, and they were arguing over whether to include something about inviting only the good families, the quote, good families, into that show. Do you have any observation similar in your scene?
Yeah. There's like rivalries within the scene, of course. And it's very desi drama type. You know, some of this shit can be seen on Star Plus. You know, and it really annoys me, to be honest, because this bullshit just starts at the smallest reason. But you know, us being desi, us being Pakistani, we have to aggravate that shit a lot. So the scene does splinter off. I mean, it doesn't look too apparent to a foreign person, because on Facebook everyone's friends, everyone's liking each other's pictures and typing haha in the comments, you know. But when you're down here, there's like a cold war between certain groups and certain people, and I can't name any names, and I don't want to either, because I believe that the scene should remain unified for the long run. So yeah.
All right, and where do you draw inspiration from in your music specifically?
Foreskin, my first band Foreskin, was influenced by the 80s hardcore punk and crossover thrash scene. When we started out, we used to write 40, 50-second songs called Kill the Principal and Raid the Stage, because we were like 17, 18 years old, and we were just pissed off at all the Dream Theater cover bands, the Iron Maiden cover bands, and we just were like, you know what, we're going to screw all this technicality, screw covering bands, we're going to just make 60-second songs. Over time, through lineup changes and whatnot, it became a proper thrash metal band. And the other band, Multinational Corporations, which is probably my main band now, we started out, it was like a half of a joke, because there was 3 vocalists and like just 1 guitarist, and the people who were supposed to be doing drums and bass, etc., they weren't doing that shit. It was just like one musician doing everything. That's Shiraz. So it was just started as a joke, but over time it became serious, because we saw like how people reacted, and people were really interested in hearing some proper grindcore music from Pakistan. So, and our influences, they started out a little bit hackneyed, but over the time we just filtered it down to like 80s and 90s crust and grind bands with a lot of hardcore thrown in.
I noticed your Multinational Corporations output is pretty overtly political, which is kind of a scary thing to be in Pakistan. How do you feel about that? I
think that the general stuff I say in real life is worse than what the stuff I said on record is. So if I ever get lynched, it's because I had a big mouth in a bazaar or a tea stall. than on the record, because the record is just going to be heard by a couple hundred people in Pakistan, because the people who are into this music. The rest of people won't even know what I'm talking about, because it's all screams and growls. But the general stuff I say is far more bound to get me in trouble. On the record, it's just toned down a couple notches.
What do you think is holding the extreme metal scene in Pakistan back?
The biggest thing is that, in a sense, we're disconnected from the rest of the world. Like, for example, we can't order records online, we can't order CDs and tapes online because there's no PayPal in Pakistan. PayPal doesn't work, and no extreme metal label in their right mind would send stuff out to a country that doesn't even have PayPal. You know, there's other ways of going about it, but it's really shady and stuff, so it doesn't really work out. And then the other thing is that it's really impossible to get a band from, say, the UK, or even a regional band, Indonesia, Malaysia, to come to Pakistan. The plane tickets are really expensive, and it's not that Pakistan is an unsafe place. That people don't even think about that when they're coming in to play somewhere. You know, bands came to Sri Lanka when this whole Tamil civil war was going on, so I don't see how that's a problem. The main problem is just that the plane tickets are really expensive, far more expensive than other countries. I mean, it's cheaper to go to India than it is to go to Pakistan. Even when you're there, there's like no guarantee of basic stuff like how the gig's gonna turn out, whatnot, and if like the foreign bands are gonna enjoy playing here. I think they probably would, but obviously when no one else has done it, so the doubt is gonna linger in their minds. There's a lot of visa problems, passport problems that come with coming to Pakistan, so a lot of people just don't want to risk that.
Right. So I was wondering, when did you first encounter extreme music, and at what point in your life did it click and say, hey, I want to do that?
Basically, I was like lucky enough to go to a school where all my seniors, and I mean literally all my seniors, they used to listen to stuff like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Sabotage, and whatnot. So when I was just like 13 or 14, I used to look at these guys, and I used to think, man, I want to do this shit too. I want to be in bands. I want to go on stage, scream my balls out on a microphone, and it was just innocent. Like at the time, I was just looking at my seniors and thought they were really cool, and I wanted to be cool too, you know, like the basic early teenage thoughts. Afterwards, I got kicked out of school, and I started like writing a lot of lyrics, and eventually I got admitted into another school. So I met my guitarist there for Foreskin, Umer, and we decided to form a band. And we had like the same ideas about music and whatnot. So finally meeting someone who listened to the same bands as you, that was a catalyst alone. Like he didn't even know how to play guitar at the time. He was like, "I'll learn guitar. You learn how to scream." Like, yeah, that's perfect. And that's how the band started.
I thought it was fascinating because, in my experience, usually, early on we look up to all the older kids and eventually we kind of create our own tastes, which diverge from them, and we realize, okay, they weren't as cool as we thought they were.
Yeah, exactly. And most of these people who I used to look up to, I think half of them are into disco and rave and stuff like that, and I don't even get with that stuff, you know. Like, I listen to electronic music and whatnot. You know, people know that about me, but like going to raves and stuff like that, doing ecstasy, like that stuff is not for me. So most of my seniors, which I looked up to, they just fizzled out, and I'm still here screaming my shit off for no apparent reason still. So yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of those older kids, I'm looking at them on Facebook now, and they've got families, they've moved on.
Yeah,
and all that.
they've been married and whatnot, so seems like they're living that whole boring life.
Basically, and a lot of them are all balding now.
Yeah, that really sucks, man. You can't rock out if you're balding.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What relationship do you see between your scene and the kind of the North American Takwacore scene, which, well, it doesn't really exist anymore, but what relationship do you see with that?
It kind of pisses me off, to be honest. Like, because of the Takwacore scene, I mean, it's like decent fun music what they did, but it's more of an expat thing, it's an expatriate thing. Pakistanis here don't necessarily know or care about Takwakor. People in the scenes here, they don't like give two shits about it. And it went as far as to the point that this record label, Tam 89 Records, which just puts out vinyl compilations of local punk scenes from all around the world, they did one in Pakistan, and it was called Nevermind the Takwakors. And it was just, side A was, I think, 2 or 3 just basic punk rock bands, and the side B was just like fastcore, power violence, grindcore, crust, hardcore, stuff like that. And the whole theme of that vinyl was apparently that Takwakor is a strictly North American thing, and what we do, we don't need to call it anything. We call it what it's supposed to be called, just basic extreme music. We're not trying to separate ourselves by making up a fictitious genre, whatever. And also, personally, I just have this problem with Takwakor in that I don't get the faith element in it, to be honest. The stuff I grew up on, the punk stuff I grew up on was fairly old school. Stuff like Amoebics, Doom, they had songs like that said explicitly, no gods, no masters. I'd like to think that there are a lot of people, religious people, spiritual people within these genres, but they don't advertise it because they're secular minded. They don't want to advertise it. They don't care if they're Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, whatever. They don't care if you're Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, whatever. They just want to make loud, angry music, talk about all the evils in the world. And when you bring like a faith element into it, it just kind of, it becomes like awkward. It's the big elephant in the room. Like, yeah, cool. You're talking about all the bad shit in the world, but at the same time, you're advertising faith, and that's just weird, man. I like to stay clear from that stuff.
Yeah, one thing, it's like a theory I have about genres that end in core. They last for long, they have their time, and they have a pretty quick decline once they run out of their kind of identity. Once that scene runs its course, either it becomes too popular or it just declines. It's kind of like that Batman, Batman thing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But Takwakor was never going to be around for like a long time, as you said earlier. That it's declined now, and I think rightly so. I think there are only a handful of decent Takwakor bands. I like the Kuminas, their first album and the second, like EPU. They were really good stuff, and they combined influences from a lot of different, not just punk but also alternative rock, surf rock stuff together to form like their own style. And I really like their Urdu and Punjabi stuff more than their like general whatever English stuff. I think that's where their true identity comes out. It is enjoyable. ALTbrown were a really cool band. The Egyptian like doom crust or whatever. I liked how they blended their native instruments in, but most of the other bands didn't really strike my fancy. I mean, for the most part, most of them don't even sound punk to me. It's just like some kind of alternative rock, which is cool, but just don't go around calling it like a punk or whatever if it doesn't sound punk. That's annoying in itself. Perhaps I'm being a bit elitist, but yeah.
Certainly. I think as far as what I was getting through is either you have to adapt. Takwakor either had to adapt and become something that's totally alien to what it once was, or it kind of locks itself in and it never changes. And that's I think all genres have to deal with that.
Yeah. To Takwakor's credit, there was like a lot of diversity in the scene, but that the diversity was also their downfall because there wasn't exactly a cohesive sound, Like when you're talking about, like, for example, take New York hardcore, there's always been like diversity in their scene, but there's always been a cohesive sound. And what takes a genre further is a cohesive sound, not gimmicks. A genre based on gimmicks is never going to last long. There needs to be a proper cohesive sound element. And also just my biggest grievance is this, that a random white person, a random Gora, he's going to listen to random bands from Pakistan and he's going to think, oh, this is Takwakor. And they're like, no, hell no, man, this isn't Takwakor. The bands have been doing this here since before Takwakor was ever conceived. bands in like all sorts of Muslim countries have been doing this sort of stuff. So it would be nice if Taqwa was, if defined, just limited to an expatriate definition, because it sure as hell doesn't apply here, because we've been doing it for a long time before it was ever conceived.
Certainly. And I remember that documentary, they kind of had difficulty kind of endearing themselves to Pakistan specifically.
Yeah. And to be honest, I did enjoy the documentary. I did enjoy the movie, and I do enjoy some of the bands, but I just don't enjoy the whole climate, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. And where do you see the extreme music scene in Pakistan and South Asia going in the future?
I think there's a lot of potential in Bangladesh. That's my favorite place right now in extreme metal. In India, there's a lot of good punk stuff coming out of the woodworks. More kids are listening to hardcore and crust and grind. And there's a really prolific power violence band in Delhi called Snuff X. And they've done like 100 splits or whatever, and they've only been around like almost 2 years or so. And Bangalore has a really good grindcore scene, and by that I mean like all kinds of grindcore, from porno grind, gore grind, to crust, like straight hardcore style grindcore. They're doing really well for themselves, and they have this festival every year called Undergrind, and bands from Singapore like Wormrot have played there as well. So India has like a lot of potential. Indian metal has always had potential because it's a big place. A shitload of people there, a huge number of people who could potentially be metal listeners, So it's no surprise. And Nepal and Sri Lanka, they've always been quality as well. It's just I'm just waiting for certain things in Pakistan to open up, certain things in the mentality to open up. It's just terribly inconsistent. We'll have 2 good years, and then we'll have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 shit years. And it's just the shit years that we have to try and get through.
Do you see the good years coming up soon?
I think last year was a good year, and I think this year will also be a great year, because last year we had 3 gigs. We played a gig in my university's acting room where all the actors rehearsed. We played a gig there because the acoustics were great, and it was fantastic. We rented out a room in this place called DHA, which is this upper middle class area in Lahore, and we played a gig there. It was great as well. And then we went over to Islamabad and played, and I think the response every time was just fantastic. People were so happy that there's more than just one gig going on this year, and people will always be happy. At every gig, we've seen people who have absolutely no relationship with metal coming in and listening. People who have never heard grindcore before just going nuts and starting circle pits. So I think as long as we just play more gigs, the scene will stay active. This year, I don't know much about how the gig situation is gonna turn out, but there's a lot of bands releasing stuff this year, and I'll probably be writing about those bands on Eternal Abhorrence too. So just watch out for that.
All right, will do. Well, that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank you, Hassan Umer, for speaking to me today, and good luck to you in 2015.
Thank you, man. Likewise.
And that was Hassan Umer, main vocalist for Multinational Corporations and Foreskin, who also makes a music blog, eternalabhorrence.wordpress.com. Please join us for the next edition of ALTbrown. You can find us at altbrown.tumblr.com and soundcloud.com/altbrown. Let's close with another sample from Multinational Corporations. This is Jamaat al-Mulk.
Jamaat al-Mulk.